Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Red Bull are admitting we might as well just pack it up, crown Max Verstappen the world champion for the next 2 seasons and come back for the new regulations in 2026. It's very rare that Red Bull engineers are this upfront before the upcoming season, but Ben Waterhouse says that the RB20 is going to be so good based on hitting basically all the development targets they set for it over the many improvements they believe they could make on last year's all-conquering RB19 that they're already working on the RB21 for 2025. This sends quite the message to the opposition that there is almost zero chance that anybody is going to be able to compete with Red Bull and Max Verstappen this season. Very much into your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Speaking of some other things happening at Red Bull, new rumours emerging that Helmut Marko has signed a new 3-year contract extension with Red Bull to stay on within the outfit. There was lots of talk a couple of months ago that Helmut Marko and Christian Horner hadn't exactly had a falling out, but more so there was a battle for power internally at Red Bull, especially in terms of who makes the final decision on what happens at AlphaTauri, and Marko's involvement with the team after Dietrich Mateschitz' passing was somewhat called into question under the new leadership of Oliver Mintzlaff. But the rumour has it that Marko is going to stay around, and he says that he's going to be at every single race next season. Despite the fact that he's already 80 years old, he's going to be 81 this year, Marko is not going anywhere anytime soon. So look, we still get to have Marko's quality comments in and around the paddock, whether those comments are for good or for ill, as we have seen both sides of, I suppose, over the last several years. But I think in general, if this is confirmed, it makes a bit of sense. But I'm just surprised to see Marko. I thought Marko might call it a day by now, right, and decide to retire and do whatever. But no, another 3 years. I mean, he's going to be there until he's what, 84, something like that, 84, 85. Going to be pretty crazy. So, he's basically doing the Fernando Alonso of the team management side on the Red Bull side of the business. He also mentions that the RB20 did fail the first crash test. There were rumours about this the other day, but Marko says, look, it's ridiculous. If we had passed the first crash test, that would be a problem. If it would mean we did a bad job, which is the point we mentioned at the time, that when you fail the first crash test, it means that you actually not put quite enough weight in the car. You can then put a little bit more weight on the car until you pass it, and then, you've absolutely minimized the weight you're requiring. Rumor has it that Ferrari have passed theirs. Whether they also failed their first one, we don't really know. Alpine apparently also failed their first one, but yeah, Marko confirming they did fail the first crash test, but they think that that was all part of the plan, which it might well have been. Can anybody catch Red Bull and Max Verstappen is the story of the season. Aston Martin have had kind of mixed opinions really on what their new car is going to be, because there was talk a little while ago now that they're not expecting the same development change that they got from 22 to 23 with this year's cycle into 24, but now there's rumours that they're actually going very bold in their development plan and will make a huge change compared to last season. So look, I'm sure we're going to see lots of cars that are reminiscent in some way of the RB19, and for very good reason, but it seems like many teams are taking radically different approaches in terms of how they want to get there, using some of their own ideas as well. Aston Martin are seemingly among that. Mercedes will also be in a similar position. They're not going to copy the RB19, but they are going to change basically everything, and Mercedes have talked about this for some time now. And these are some reports coming out of Motorsport Italy today. So again, Italian press, take it as you will, but this is what they have to say on the W15. It will have absolutely no aerodynamic design link with the W14. In terms of the aero concept, it will be dramatically different and basically have nothing in common. I'm sure there'll be, it's a car at the end of the day. It's got 4 wheels. It's going to be painted a similar colour. It's going to have a front wing, a rear wing, and a couple of side pods on there in a cockpit. So, look, it's going to be, I'm sure, there's going to be some similarities. I'll be interested to see what they do with the front wing, given the fact that it seems like Mercedes have had one of the more innovative front wing concepts over the last couple of years, but there's been additional FIA intervention to kind of shut down some of the loopholes they've been using to create some outwash that the FIA don't like because it makes it more difficult for cars to follow. But now the FIA is saying, well, the teams are creating outwash again anyway. These set of regulations are kind of ruined. We don't really care. We'll fix it in 2026. That's basically what they're saying nowadays. So following is certainly harder. The drivers made that very clear after Jeddah last year, when Sector 1 at Jeddah was pretty much as tough to follow, it seems, as it was in 2021, because of just the nature of that part of the track where the air is meant to escape to, it cannot. And the increased wake of these cars compared to the 2022 cars, especially the early 2022 versions of the cars. Now, the cockpit will be further back. This, look, again, it's rumours, but Hamilton has requested this. Turtle Wolf says they're listening to Hamilton on this, and there were rumours the other day that have done this as well. So that's one thing that apparently will be changed. The gearbox as well will be smaller and lighter. We heard this rumour a while ago that the intention will be for the gearbox to be smaller, therefore therefore the rear bodywork can be more compact, which actually apparently quite significantly improves the airflow and the straight line speed potential. If the car's quite bulky at the back, then it makes it quite draggy. So that's what Red Bull did last year. They made an absolutely tiny gearbox, which did cause Verstappen some issues, because the smaller it is, the less reliable it potentially is going to be. But obviously, the Red Bull had more positives than negatives as a result of that kind of trade-off. More bodywork, or more compact rear bodywork, and then continued pull rod suspension on, I think, especially the rear suspension. I'm not sure they've talked so much about the front suspension yet, but it has been said that there'll be a brand new chassis, new front suspension, new rear suspension, new aerodynamics, and new side pods. So yeah, everything's going to change on the W15. Mercedes need to nail every single one of these elements if they want to compete, and maybe that's not even going to be enough, because this is what Red Bull are trying to say at the moment, and it's quite rare. We'll see the comments of Red Bull in a second that they're quite this upfront going into a new season. Usually Red Bull keep as much as they can behind closed doors. They, quite often they don't even reveal their car, do they? They reveal just a stock model with the livery on, and then when they actually turn up to the testing, that's when we see their real car. Maybe they'll do that again this year. We shall see. This was just some of the race video they did earlier today, analysing some of the changes in suspension concept that Mercedes brought with their Monaco update, but they'll need to go far further than this, and yeah, more than likely their front and rear suspension will be dramatically different and will take on a rather Red Bull-esque anti-squat, anti-dive component that I'm sure other teams are looking into as well. But Red Bull, of course, are not just going to sit back, relax, and allow the other teams to catch up to them. They have their own development to work on as well. Ferrari even mentioned a little while ago now that they feel like Red Bull have created some sort of new technology in the brake calipers to enable them to have lighter weight brake calipers than other teams are capable of achieving, so they can, put more weight elsewhere and reach the minimum weight limit in a different way. That's what Ferrari believe that Red Bull are doing, and also Red Bull have been known for very good performance under braking in general. One of the reasons why Daniel Ricciardo was such a force at Red Bull and not so much at McLaren is that those two cars, in terms of performance and stability of the car under braking, are basically on the entire opposite end of the spectrum. So yeah, Danny Rick back in a Red Bull would be exciting, of course, and apparently Ferrari believe they found a way that Red Bull are doing that. But it's one thing to understand what they're doing, and another thing to understand exactly how, and how you might try and do that yourself. So Red Bull have been quite forthright really over the last few weeks on the improvements they are trying to make with their RB20, right, from the RB19. Max Verstappen said that there were plenty of things wrong with last year's car, which is quite difficult to believe. Like, okay, maybe you can argue that every other car was terrible and therefore the Red Bull was also not great, and somehow it was still winning everything. But, I don't know. The Red Bull, to me, was basically perfect. But sure, there were a few flaws in certain areas. Verstappen said over the curbs wasn't great. Still better than basically every other car, but maybe wasn't as good as they thought it could be. In some of the slow speed corners, Ferrari could match them. Maybe Mercedes could sometimes match them. McLaren could sometimes match them. So that's obviously not good enough for Red Bull. They want to be fastest in every corner type, and obviously street circuits in general sometimes cause them problems on the bumpier tracks such as Singapore, where, look, I mean, their car didn't work that well. There was all the talk about the technical directive coming into effect on that weekend and whether it was a coincidence they'd underperformed or not. Turns out the Red Bull, the setup just didn't work so well at Singapore, and they had a difficult weekend, of course, from start to finish. So some improvements they want to make, but let's be honest, on many Grand Prix weekends, the Red Bull was the fastest car by an absolute mile. So the downright scary thing for the opposition, and to be fair for those of us who want a competitive season coming up, is that Red Bull have admitted they're already working on the 2025 car. We know absolutely that this year's car will be massively important for every team. For Mercedes, it's arguably one of the most important cars they've ever built. Not just because they need to get back on track, but also because in 2026, brand new set of regulations, engine and aerodynamic. So 2025's car is, for every team on the grid, I would say, going to be a direct evolution of this year's car. They won't be able to have the resources to do otherwise. So, whatever happens this year will massively determine what happens next year. Teams can't afford to make mistakes, but Red Bull are apparently so confident they're already pushing ahead. So these are comments here from Ben Waterhouse, who's this guy, and they talk about his where he was born, career starts, engineer at Red Bull Racing, all this stuff. So this is his profile. These are the words that he's had to say to the media over the last couple of days. We were aware that the RB19 had considerable limitations, which is, it's crazy that Red Bull speak about that car in this way, given that it won almost every race last season, 21 of 22, technically in terms of win percentage, became the most dominant Formula 1 car ever. And sure, that was in significant part down to their competition not really delivering the goods, especially Mercedes and Ferrari from the start of the season. But it was still an absolute monstrous machine. And, well, they talk about it like it wasn't even that good. If we look back at Singapore, there were definitely weaknesses. There are areas we want to improve, whether it's high speed or low speed performance. At the same time, the car did have strengths, which we want to build on at the same time, trying to address the weaknesses. So they go on to talk about the fact that apparently the car also lost more competitiveness than its rivals when the unevenness of the road surface required it to raise its ground clearance, a condition that occurred mainly on city circuits. So we definitely saw that in Singapore, but other tracks as well where they had to raise the ride height, sure, they probably lost some edge, but their edge was so big that maybe it didn't matter if they were losing more edge. But of course, Red Bull next year are going to expect other teams to be more competitive. They want to improve their car. You know, you wouldn't be a world championship winning team if you weren't trying to make your car the best it can possibly be. So Red Bull say, Ben Waterhouse says, and as I mentioned before, usually Red Bull are quite secretive really as to what's going on behind the scenes. But in this case, because of this, we set clear targets quite far back during the RB19 development process for the RB20. So we're talking, you know, well over a year ago potentially now, or maybe, 8-9 months ago, what the plan is going to be for the RB20. In general, we managed to hit most of them. So before we talk about the next part here, that's interesting in and of itself. They set loads of targets in terms of improvements in certain areas, high-speed corners, low-speed corners, competitiveness on bumpy tracks, this type of stuff, to try and win Singapore, basically. And, well, they say that pretty much all the things they've tried for, they've done. Maybe a couple of things they didn't quite nail, but in terms of what the new RB20 says in the wind tunnel testing, in the simulator testing, they've taken the RB19 and they've kept the good parts and they've improved the bad parts in basically every single way that they were trying to. But as he goes on to say, there's still other things they think they can improve on. I wouldn't say everybody is satisfied, though. There's still work to be done to try and improve upon the RB19, which is very interesting in combination with the second sentence, where he goes on to say about the 2025 car. The RB20 is at least 6 months old, and we are already starting to shift our attention to the RB21, even though the season hasn't started yet. So what about that? Saying that they basically designed this RB20 last year back in July, August, and it was done then, and after working on it for the last 6 or so months, they've realized, okay, we've improved the RB19 in many ways, but probably not every way. So this is the car for this season, but we also want to do XYZ, which we can potentially achieve over the course of this year, but mainly on the RB21. So that's how far ahead of the game they are. That 6 months ago, they designed the RB20, or at least were working very close to conclusion on the RB20, which they believe, according to their simulations, is going to be a massive step up on the RB19 in many ways, and they're already so far ahead of their thinking that they're looking at the RB21. I mean, this is peak Mercedes dominant era level stuff, where they're working on the car for 2 years away before the new season's even begun. So people will of course say, well, it looks like that testing time penalty really hurt them badly, right? When they're talking about the fact that, the RB20 is going to be a masterpiece. It's pretty much what he's saying, right? Because they're not saying, oh yeah, we're still working on the RB20, there's still things you want to tighten up. It's like, yeah, well, this car's basically the best we can do, and then next year's car is obviously going to be even better. So yeah, you hear this and you think, if you're the other teams hearing this, and it's interesting that Red Bull are saying this, you're thinking, all right, okay, chalk it up, right? Even George Russell did say that he doesn't expect Mercedes, even if they nail everything, to be winning in Bahrain. He thinks they might be able to win by mid-season, by, who knows. But, the belief is around the paddock that Red Bull are for sure going to start off with the strongest car again, and it just makes you wonder whether anything is actually possible in terms of a championship fight. Even Eddie Jordan talked about it and said that, they're going to finish first and second next year, walk away with the constructors. The issue is that let's say Mercedes or Ferrari or whoever catch up to Red Bull 5-6 races in. That's very optimistic thinking, but let's say they did. Verstappen at that point has probably already got a decent championship lead. The idea that somebody else is going to catch him up just seems out of the realms of possibility, and Red Bull are so confident in their concept and their designs. Who knows if Mercedes' new ideas work? Who knows if Ferrari's changes, Aston Martin's changes, McLaren's evolutions work? Like, I don't imagine Mercedes are thinking about the W16, because to do that, you've got to be pretty damn sure that what you're doing on the W15 actually works. Red Bull are so sure that they understand everything about these regulations that they can safely work on a car that, before this revolution in some ways the RB20 as even hitting the track. So definitely a scary side for the competition. Could this come back to bite Red Bull in some way? It's tough to imagine that it really would. And sure, even if their car isn't as competitive as it might otherwise be, Verstappen is so good, the team is so good, that it's just so hard to find a way to look past Red Bull at the moment. So it's very plausible that the next 2 seasons are another absolute bloodbath. That seems to be what Red Bull are implying, and all Horner's words on, well, it's going to be closer, etc., etc. Ben Waterhouse comes out and says, well, the engineers don't really think that it is going to be. So very much interested in your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.